Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Corporate Scrutiny's Review Board. Thanks for coming. Any apologies, Dom?
Yes, we have apologies for Councillor Nater and Councillor Ingle. Thank you, Chair.
Declaration of interest, anybody? Declaration of interest? No? Minutes of meeting held 11th of March. Noted. Wow, that's not weird. Item 5, update on the new partnership model. Who's doing that?
That's me. That's me.
Come on, Rachel.
Thank you very much,
Over to
Chair.
you.
Thank you. I'll just talk through it. Obviously, it's not quite as helpful without the presentation, but you can have that obviously after the meeting. So what I've been asked to come and talk to you about here is the work we've been doing and continue to do to create a sense of a city partnership that supports our key objectives for our city rather than just what the council is doing. Yeah. So we created last June, in the middle of the pandemic, a partnership board. So a real sense of creating a partnership space, and I'll describe that as a platform for that system-wide collaboration. So very simplistically, how do we make sure that all of the great organisations in the city, our businesses, our voluntary and community sector, our cultural institutions, really important components to what makes the city tick, actually work together to try and maximise our input and our effectiveness. So we did that last June, and that was created. We've only ever met virtually, so only ever met in the pandemic. So monthly meetings, but all of them virtual. Very much a space to create this common purpose and creating a way of working together differently on outcomes for the city. And we often talk about it, that it is greater than the sum of its parts. You know, by having all of those partners together, we get a much better outcome generally. So the role of the Partnership Board is to galvanise our partners, our citizens and our stakeholders to enable Derby to become the best it can be through that positive collaboration, set the vision and ambition for Derby, establish common goals and shared outcomes for all partners to work towards, be a steward for the city and advocate positively and champion the city and celebrate success for the city. The membership of the board, and it has been sort of grown over time, is chaired by the leader of the council, and all the group leaders are invited. We have the Vice-Chancellor of the University, the Chief Exec of the Clinical Commissioning Group for the NHS, reps from Toyota UK and Rolls-Royce, Marketing Derby, the Vice Principal of Derby College, the lead person from the Department of Work and Pensions, the Chief Exec of Community Action Derby, the Chief Exec of YMCA, key manager for Active Derbyshire, key local partner lead for the Environment Agency, the rep from the Chief Exec of the Chamber of Commerce, the Chief Exec of the Quad, the Bishop of Derby, and our local Chief Superintendent for the police. So quite a big, broad membership, and it's been a really, really effective space, I think, at galvanising stuff we've done together, which is really important. I've got a great slide that you can't see. Of course. So the community and voluntary sector, we've got Community Action Derby and the YMCA, and Quad are there for the cultural organisations. So they're sort of third. And I think I'll come on to, that's what we did last year, very quickly, get this up and running, get it working. Oh, you got the picture, excellent. Well, the picture you can see on your, is multicoloured, and you probably can't see that in black and white, but effectively it's black, it's multicoloured, that picture. Because the system that supports our city is really complicated. If you think about the DWP, the Environment Agency, the police, the health service, the council, all these different bits of the system, it's quite a maze to navigate, isn't it? I think any of us who try and do that from a citizen's point of view, it's really complicated. So what we're trying to do is simplify that complicated mess and make that better, make it make more sense. And just to be really clear, the role of the council in navigating that complex system is to provide that really important democratic leadership. We're the only bit of that complicated mess of spaghetti that is elected by local people, that has a mandate and accountability for what it does. It's a really important role. It isn't in charge of it, but it's a really important role. And we have that role to facilitate and enable that space for people to work together on collaborative outcomes. So we are building that collaboration, and we are that champion. And that picture, which is the playing field pictures, I often use this analogy. The council's job is very much to create a playing field that is well lit and managed and safe to play on. You know, we make sure the grass is cut, this is an analogy, the lines are drawn on it, it's lit well, and then other people may play on it. Other people may do things that make our city a great place to be, but we create the environment for it. The best example of that is the Marketplace initiative last year and this year. We created the Marketplace, but other people, hospitality businesses, are coming and bringing their food onto that space for residents to use. Our partners in the cultural institutions are putting on events in that space. We created the infrastructure for it, but actually everyone plays on it. That makes sense. It's a really important analogy. I think it describes the intention. So a year later, so we've been going for a year in the Partnership Board, I think these are our reflections as a partnership, so a much broader awareness of each other's perspectives. And a real sense that we have different objectives, different, ways of operating. It's been really a maturing of our relationship over that year. And I think COVID has turbocharged that. It's made it even more important. We actually understood those opportunities to work together differently. And there's been some fantastic work in COVID. I've got so many examples. I don't want to bore you with them all, but the Muslim Burial Committee, working fantastic, the Marketplace itself, the work on some of the big projects we've had around economic development, but also the community hub itself, the work we did with the Food Alliance, working with the Food for Thought Alliance, supporting vulnerable people. With so many things we've done have been in partnership. It's been really important. And we hadn't have had that partnership and a platform to do that, where would we have been, I think, for our citizens in the last year? So really, really good work in the emergency. We've agreed collectively a citywide recovery plan framework. So our recovery plan is owned by the partnership, not just the council. We've got a really important part to play in that. And lots of great examples of things we've done collectively in that space. So our sort of context a year on, taking stock about that, was a real recognition that, and I don't want to be depressing, but the challenges that face the city coming out of COVID are, as were, probably more difficult and more challenging than being in the response phase. The emergency was one thing, but dealing with the impact of what's happened over the last year, the mental health challenges, the physical health backlogs we've got in the NHS, the impacts around increased inequality, really exacerbated our existing inequality in the city? What's the impact going to be on children who've missed a whole year of schooling? You know, there's so massive, big issues for us in the city, and we really need to recognise that's a challenge. So we need to be driven by outcomes. How can we really solve some of these problems? And we need to get all of the ideas, energy, resources across all of those partners channeled in the same direction if we're going to be able to address those big challenges. So I think, I would say this, wouldn't I, but I think this is true, and many of our partners, you speak to them, will talk about Team Derby. There is a sense of, we are part of Team Derby. I hear it a lot from partners, I hear it a lot. The way we've worked in that collaboration, what can you do, what can I do, how can we do together, has been really important as a culture of operating, and that way of working must be sustained into the recovery phase. It's absolutely critical. And we have also be really able to flex our structures and do things differently and be agile. We've done that in the last year to meet those challenges. So the structure of how we organise our partnership and the structure of that needs to be, you know, dynamic and not sort of fixed and static. So our current structure, which is interesting because, and you'll know this probably better than I will, but there was a leadership board back in the day in the city. That was abolished a few years ago. And what happened was a number of sort of thematic sector-based boards continued or didn't continue, depending on whether they were seen to be valuable or not by the people who went to them. And we had these sort of 6 boards, and some of these are legally required, so health and well-being and safer, the community crime and disorder partnership. Others are not required legally but exist. So the Renaissance Board, looking at the economy, the Culture, Leisure and Tourism Board, the Stronger Board, Children, Family and Learners Board, Health and Wellbeing and Safer. They exist, and we've overlaid them in the last year, again, probably the last 6 months, with the Recovery Board for the community and the Recovery Board for the economy. But that sort of structure is a bit odd, and we ran some workshops at the end of autumn last year with all of the partners saying, actually, how do we want to organise ourselves to be best placed for the recovery? And what was recognised is this structure probably isn't the best structure we could have to do that. That was really a recognition. And some of the feedback that came out of those workshops was this sort of stuff, really. And these are all comments that were made by partners, that we really need to join up the good that we're doing, build Team Derby, set a plan that is, measured and effective, strengthen the relationships, have common goals, all of that. And one of the things that we're really reflecting on is that nothing is separate. The economy impacts on your well-being. These things are all connected. So what was agreed was we needed to have a real sense of much more thematic outcome structures rather than things that are sectoral, so are about cultural partners or about all the voluntary sector or about all the economy. It has a much more thematic outcome-based sort of structures. So it's a different space, based on evidence, much more inclusive. But what we're going to do, therefore, and I'll probably have to move on to the other slide, but we basically come to the conclusion there are 4 big themes that we need to focus on around recovery, and they are a vibrant Derby, a green Derby, a growing Derby, and a resilient Derby. And we need to work on how we create that structure together as part of our way we operate anyway. So we are going to be designing, with partners, independent chair for those 4 boards and a mix of partners on those boards. Rather than just all culture on one or all business on another, we want to have people on all of them because actually there's parts, all of them to play in those big key things. And we want to involve as much as we possibly can, and make it as simple as possible. So we have sort of done some morphing of the role of the partnership board. So the partnership board is agreeing those wider sort of recovery outcomes and is a platform to hold those boards to account. But it also provides a really good platform to share what's going on in the city. And one of the great things about the virtual reality is that we can have meetings of 100, 200 people if we wanted to, and the Economic Steering Board has had meetings of 70, 80 people on a virtual call who get all the information on what's going on particular projects all in one go. So the idea is that the Partnership Board takes on that role. So one of the meetings of the Partnership Board will be focused on the outcomes, and one of them will be a sharing experience for the whole city to really build that sense of, what we're trying to achieve. So thematic boards underneath the partnership board, and I'll go on to those 4 things, and then other alliances can be quite flexible. So we are talking about these 4 boards, resilient, so looking at all the work on joining up how we work in places, addressing inequality, work on poverty, and the health and well-being agenda. So that's going to be really focused on that building that resilience in our communities. a thematic board around the green agenda, so including the Climate Change Commission we've created over recent years, and the mobility work and our City, Our River project, but much broader than that, about the whole greening of the city. The Vibrant board is about how we reinvent city centre, how we really support the cultural work we want to do, and the City of Culture fits within that framework, and our master plan for the city, which is being developed. And then the Growing Derby is our skills, employment, investment, that whole sense of jobs and skills. So those are the 4 thematic boards we're going to create. And we're working very much, again, in this collaborative Team Derby way with our partners. We've got a shaping group of our partners about how we move from what we've got now to that new model. And had a workshop back in June. We've now got some stakeholder mapping, communication going on at the moment. We're going to put the enablers in place to do that, map out those evidence bases, and those meetings will start happening in September on those 4 big themes. And that's really the plan, how we're going to work on that. And we've got the original plan already agreed. And what we want to try and do is to maintain a regular review, check, is it working, isn't it working, how do we do this differently, and keep on with that. And the most important thing I would say is that the way we've worked together over the last year has been really, really powerful. And we must maintain that way of working, because that mess of spaghetti is the reality. If we can make that clearer and simpler and weave it together to make it make more sense, that has to be the best chance we've got of meeting the recovery challenges the city faces. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for that. Any questions? Councillor.
You mentioned the attracting jobs, industries and all. So what's the plan? How will they come to you, or council is having a plan to attract the businesses to come to Derby?
There are so many examples in that space. So, yesterday I went down to Pride Park and we launched our youth employment scheme with the DWP partnership, where we had about 70 different employers in the room. We had 500 young people who came through the DWP's referral mechanisms to have interviews actually at Pride Park, and we use a incentive of a Wayne Rooney signed shirt for them to come along too. And many people actually got jobs offered on that day yesterday while they had that interview there and there. So one example. So there are a number of different examples of things we're doing collectively to try and build that sense of employment and skills, making a much clearer portal. The Ascend programme, which is our programme to support really incubating new businesses and making it much easier to increase business confidence and investment. That launched on Monday. That's a joint scheme, obviously, with partners as well. And the whole thing around the Vibrant project, about making Derby a more confident, more exciting place, that drives investment. Today, you've probably seen that there's a crane in Becketwell, and you've seen that, it raises people's profile. It feels like a place on the up in a different way. So all of those can also increase confidence.
As a city, is Derby offering something unique or investment friendly for these businesses? So Derby becomes an attractive centre compared to other cities.
We're very lucky, and again, in our partnership space, so Marketing Derby are a phenomenally powerful seller of the city. They sell the city to investors all the time. They run events that do that. So they do, before COVID, they ran what they called a London embassy. So they would call investors who were based in the London area to come to a meeting in London. They did one when I went to it 2 years ago in the National Gallery, and they invited investors to come along to that and hear about Derby. And from that opportunity, we've got a number of... Becketwell itself, St James's Securities, who are our developer on Becketwell, they came through one of those conversations about, look at Derby, it's really worth investing in. So absolutely, we are trying all of those different mechanisms to build that confidence about a city to get more investment.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
I think you just touched on investment. Obviously, because of the COVID, all the country's been hit hard financially. So Derby's part of that also. So have you got all these investors in line with, we're going to bring in financial support in the city that will uprise Derby again? Obviously, you've seen some of the shops in town or outskirts and all that been very hit hard. So have you got all these investors that are willing to come and invest back in Derby?
It's a really complicated question, good question, but there's a hard answer to give. Clearly the council can create the environment for investment, but it can't drive, make it happen. So what I would say is that the work of the vibrancy theme, which is, what we're doing despite the board not being created completely and of working yet, but in the other sort of sense, is that we need to understand how we reinvent our city centre. Because the retail changes around the high street were happening before COVID, and we were losing retailers in the city centre. We were very lucky that we have our Into centre was part owned by somebody else, by Cale Street Investment, and they bought out the rest of the bit they didn't own from Into when that went bust, and we maintained the property centre, which is really good for us. And Cale Street are a great partner in the city partnership sort of space. But we have to reinvent the use of the city centre, because there won't be enough retail interest to fill all those empty shops. There needs to be, and part of the plan that we have, and I'm sure members are aware of this plan, is to bring people to live in the city centre and to work in it and to create vibrancy and exciting destination things to come to that will create confidence. So Beckett Well is the example of that. Beckett Well, the performance venue, having people living in it. The block that's being built now is the rented accommodation block for new housing. So it brings more footfall. And all of those things around confidence begin to build more likelihood of investors coming in to the city. But it won't be about retail in quite the same way as it perhaps used to be. That answers the question at all.
To lift our town up, would we be getting any support, any financial support from the government, central government, and what sort of a figure are we asking for them?
I mean, it's a whole other conversation about how funding is organised by the government, but we have, I think, and I could get the numbers wrong here, so Alison will know better, but we have funding through the Future High Streets Fund. We've already had that agreed by government, and that is supporting the Market Hall transformation and the work that's going on there, and also the Eastern Gateway, which is the part of the Into Centre, and improving the quality of that is part of the plan. We have put in a bid to the Levelling Up Fund from government for a contribution towards the Beckett Well Arena, and that's 20 million we put in for that particular, to support that arrangement. Now that Beckett Well Arena is forward funded by the council, and we have the funding for it, but if we got £20 million from government, that releases £20 million of borrowing we can actually put into other projects in the city centre. So it's a bit, using a bit of a, moving money around a little bit. We've put in other funding mechanisms. We have 60 million in transforming cities. So without being disrespectful to one's government, the government give us money for particular things individually, not here's a pot for Derby and use it for what you want to. So we have 60 million through transforming cities for a rapid transport system in the city centre and how we really improve connectivity in the city and into Nottingham as well, and into the airport, and that is being used at the moment. We have other money, which is described through Future High Streets Fund and through the Levelling Up Fund, and there are other mechanisms of funding. We tend to go for anything we can that fits in our overall plan. So quite a lot of money is coming into Derby, but we can always use more.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel, for that presentation. You did a great job with the technical difficulties and adapted and overcome that. I've got a couple of things. Firstly, it sounds like a really exciting vision of what the council and what you guys have been doing as officers, trying to pull everything together that we've learned from the last 15, 60 and 18 months that it's been really difficult for the whole city, not just the council, but particularly the residents that we represent. So bringing those things together is really important, and learning how we adapted during that really difficult time as a community, I think it's really important. And I think what I've heard today is, and what I read before, is this is aiming to stop organisations working in silos. I know that sounds a bit David Brent speak. I've heard it so many times during my working life. And basically what it is where, organisations and people, when we're working at the macro level, we can just keep on looking with blinkers, this is my role, this is my job, I'm sticking to that. If we can open that conversation up across the city with all these different organisations, I think this will be positive for the city and for the council. So the 2 points I've got is I didn't hear whether Derby Homes were going to be part of any of the boards that I'll come on to. If you could just clarify that, because Derby Homes have got a massive imprint on that city, especially my ward. You know, we've got a high level of social housing in the ward that I represent. I know Councillor Pearce, Tracy Pearce here, same in her ward. Councillor Pandy and Mackworth, that, you know, they've got a real footprint, and we've worked really closely as councillors in the last year and a half, 18 months with Derby Homes. I think they've got a lot to offer to those boards, and if you can just let us know whether they'll be involved and where they fit in as well. Well, the second point is also, to me, from the presentation, it's going to be one main board, the partnership board, and then it's going to filter out to the 4 echelon and certain areas. That sounds really good. It's going up into the pyramid up for organisations to work together. Will the cabinet members, with the distinct portfolios that they hold, will they be slotting into these meetings and these board meetings where, you know, cabinet member for regeneration, would that be ideal for the vibrancy one? Stuff like that. So can you just clear up those things, please? Thank you.
Yeah. I always find the Derby Homes question really funny in a really positive way, in that I think of Derby Homes as part of the council. That, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the Almo arrangement is about financial benefit, and there's a good reason for doing that. But actually, Maria, Claire, David, you know, Sean, the team, they're part of our team, absolutely inside the council. And the point you make about silos is a really, really important one. Not only are there silos in the organisations in the partnership, they're also in the council. And changing that is also really critical priority of mine and the council generally. So absolutely, Derby Homes are all over those partnership boards, absolutely leading lots of the work in different ways. And the locality working is being led by Derby Homes. They're part of the Poverty Commission. They're involved in the climate change work. They're involved in lots of it, absolutely, because they are critical. No question about it. So absolutely, yes. In terms of the cabinet members, we haven't worked out the complete structures of the thematic boards, but absolutely we would like to involve those cabinet members in those things that make sense for them. We want to, I think part of the rationale behind this is to elevate the debate to the city and not the political parties and some of that conflict that gets in the way, with the greatest respect to your colleagues. So trying to raise that debate and see that bigger picture, and it's been great to get, and also to recognise the value of the councillor intelligence that we have, that it brings into that context, because it says to people, this is what's really happening in my community for something you've done here, and it really makes us accountable to the outcome of what we do. So members need to be absolutely as part of that. So yes, the cabinet members will be part of those thematic boards.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rachel. So the last thing while you're talking, it just popped into my mind is, so say I've seen there's a timetable. At the end of that first lot of timetables within the presentation, what would you see as a real success for the council, for the city, for the partnership boards and all those? What's your vision? What would you like to see at the end of that timetable, and then also moving on as well? So what would you see as a tangible success?
A really good question. I mean, it's interesting because it's in my mind at the moment for obvious reasons. But this week, we put an expression of interest in for Derby to be City of Culture in the UK 2025. And do you want to guess how many letters of support we got? We asked colleagues for a letter of support to go alongside that expression of interest. Do you want to have a guess how many we got, those letters? How many letters we got? We got 100 letters. But we did it in 10 days. We asked for it within 10 days. We got 100 letters, which included the Chief Exec of the CCG, the Chief Constable, the Chief Exec of the National Park, you know, Rolls-Royce, Toyota, Smart Park, Derby, and I mean, loads and loads of people. And that's not always easy to do, to get everyone to actually commit to write a letter as well as, you know, sort of sign up to it, you know, tacitly. So I think those things are the things that are tangible. And, you know, that was everyone was absolutely behind it, 100% behind it. I think it's that sort of thing where we don't, with the greatest respect to everybody here, that we don't waste our energy arguing between ourselves. and we actually, you know, work collectively, and we get, particularly for the question being raised before, if we want to change this city's future, we need to really maximise all the great stuff that happens here. And I do say this a lot, and I don't mean this heartedly. I meet every other day somebody else amazing in this city that I'm just bowled over by, passion and determination for this place. Seriously, I mean, really do. Of course, businesses, voluntary community, you name it, amazing. If we can gather all of that energy and we can really sell our city properly for the country and nationally, we will get much more attention and investment and, you know, interest from other people and get more things for our city. So that is how we need our energy going that way, rather than perhaps historically we end up fighting between ourselves sometimes and we waste some of that energy. So for me, it's that national profile, the funding we get in from various funding bids, it's that opportunity to do things differently is probably the best success we can get, to be honest. If that helps at all. Bit intangible, but...
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Khan?
Rachel, thank you. Maybe at a later stage, maybe end of the year, would you come back on this board and see how well the partnership has worked? So are we all colleagues? Are we? Yeah, so, yeah, so
Of course,
thank
I
you.
would love to, absolutely. No question about it.
Gone.
Can I suggest that it's the meeting after the final time frame on the presentation, perhaps, so we can link it in, so we can say, this is what's been achieved, this is where we are, and this is what we're going to do. Is that okay?
It's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for coming, and hope to see you very soon. Thanks. You're fine. We're on item 6. Our council tax and business rates and collection rates have been affected by the COVID-19. We have Alison here to help tell us. Over to you, Alison. Thank you.
So, good evening everyone. Just as a way of introduction, I'm Alison Parkin, I'm the Director of Financial Services. I think my colleague John Massey was to be with you here tonight, but he can't make it, so I'm here to introduce this item to you. So, just apologies for the presentation and apologies for the slides. They are quite small, so we will distribute those out to you afterwards. So I know I'm just conscious that there's probably numbers on there that you won't be able to probably read very clearly. So apologies for that. If I just take you through the slide pack then. So if I start with slide 2, it just gives you a bit of context really in terms of the scale and numbers that we're dealing with in terms of council tax and business rates. So for council tax, we have 111,000 domestic dwellings in the city, and it generated in 2021 £123.9 million for the council, and it's currently we have £133 million billed for 21-22. That does increase because obviously the increase in council tax year on year gives additional revenue to the council. And in terms of business rates, we have 9,119 commercial assessments in the city. 52.7 million was billed in 2021, and we currently have 79.6 million billed in 21-22. Now, if you think about it in 2021, that was obviously during the pandemic, and the council took full expansion of the fully expanded retail discount scheme during the 2021 pandemic, and that gave retail and leisure and hospitality sector a discounted scheme for business rates, and we fully applied that in 2021. There was 100% relief at that point during that financial year. Within the current financial year, you can see that we've billed slightly more in 21-22, and that's because the relief retail relief scheme has been scaled back somewhat during this financial year. So for the up to the 1st of July, we had a fully discounted scheme for our businesses, but from the 1st of July, it's 66%. And also there's a capping mechanism that's been introduced this year. So the relief to businesses isn't as good as what it was last year, but obviously with the pandemic, post-pandemic and the opening up of those sectors, we would hope that support isn't necessarily required. If I take you to slide 3, it just gives a bit of context to the scale of the council's income in terms of council tax and business rates. So for the amount of our total funding last year, this accounts to 58% of our total funding. So it's quite a significant income stream for the council, and its financial sustainability is obviously reliant on our ability to collect that 58% coming. So, and I suspect that's why it's an item of interest for yourselves in terms of understanding the scale and impact of the income. If I take you to slide 4, just over the page, this just gives you a review of the headlines for last financial year. So obviously we entered the first national lockdown, was announced on the 23rd of March, and then on the 25th of March, only 2 days later, the council announced that all recovery action for council tax and business rates would be suspended to the 30th of June. In 2021, we achieved a current year collection rate of council tax of 92.25%, and the previous year was 93.62%. So we were down last year on council tax by 1.3%, which was probably quite a successful outcome, considering the impact that the COVID had on and the pandemic had on our citizens. And I suspect that one of the reasons for the more success on the council tax side in terms of collection rates was that households were probably protected a little bit more through the furlough scheme than probably what businesses were through the business rates relief scheme, in the fact that provided protection to businesses for the rates but didn't compensate them for actually the lack of turnover. So we saw the council tax was probably a little bit more successful in terms of collection than we saw on our business rates. But in terms of the business rates collection last year, what we've got to remember is that relief that we gave, over £40 million worth of relief on the business rates to the sector, was fully funded by the government. So when we look at the statistics, our collection rates are generally okay, because we had quite a significant amount of it was protected and funded directly through the government's relief. If I take you to slide 5, you can see there some of the challenges that we had in terms of collection during last financial year. So we had no court time. The magistrates confirmed that our liability order hearings couldn't take place for the majority of last year during 2020. And when they did reopen, which I think was around November, at the amount of activity that we could put through the courts for recovery was reduced vastly. It was around 20% of what we would normally put through that. So when we did start enforcement again during last year, we had limited opportunity to really go through that enforcement mechanism. There was limitations for our enforcement agencies, because during last year our recovery was focused very much on telephone calls and reminders and letters, and wasn't at the sharper end of the business where we would normally go into probably attachment of earnings orders, bailiff activity, if that's where we needed. A lot of the recovery was just through letters and phone calls. And then during last year, we also were grappling with the effect of reduced capacity within our recovery teams, because our recovery teams were rightly focused on delivering the reliefs to our businesses, and they were the same staff that probably would do our recovery action. So we thought it was really important that the maximum amount of grant that we got through the business support grant were actually given out to our businesses in Derby. So we had very little time or staff resource to be able to do the collection activity during the year. So that they were just some of the challenges for last year. If I take you to slide 6, apologies, it is quite tiny, but it does show a comparison of last year compared to the previous year around what our recovery activity looked like. So you can see that we were actually, our recovery activity was reduced, as you would expect. But as you go down sort of to the sharper end of the enforcement mechanisms towards the right, you can see that that's really where it did take a vast reduction. So we issued reminders. We issued 39,000 reminders as opposed to 52,000 the year before. But then as we get into the court action and enforcement, use of enforcement agents, you can see that that activity declined quite substantially during last year. Slide 7 gives you a review of the year in numbers. So this is around our caseloads. So if you think about the impact on employment, I mean, that's well documented and has resulted in an overall increase in the council tax support caseload. And although this increase, you can see there it's increased by around about 500 in terms of council tax caseload, we do think that probably has been suppressed slightly from the furlough scheme that was in operation last year. And at its height, we saw around 34,000 individuals in Derby were accessing the furlough scheme. Nevertheless, though, it's clear that more people will probably be out of work going forward as those schemes retract, and we do expect pressure on our council tax caseload going forward post-pandemic. If we look at, take you to slide 8, that gives you the collection rates for 2021 and 1920. And you can see the amount of council tax that we collected and business rates that we collected. So for council tax, we collected 92.25% as opposed to the previous year, 93.62%. And business rates, we collected 90.2% as opposed to 96.8%. 5% the year before. But what we have to remember within that 90% is that a lot of that was direct funding from government, so it probably paints more of a positive picture than we would in terms of collection. Slide 9 gives you a review of the collection of arrears. So every year we do have arrears from previous financial years, and what this slide shows you that in 1920 we collected £3.6 million worth of arrears from previous financial years, and actually last financial year we collected 3.2. So our arrears were quite successful, even though it was during the pandemic. But as you can see on the business rates, as you would imagine, the business rates took a sharp drop last year in terms of the collection of arrears, and we only collected nearly £1.4 million of previous year's outstanding business rate invoices compared to £4 million that we would normally do during the year. So that is really something that will have an impact. If I take you to slide 10, you can see the collection rates as of the 30th of June 2021. And actually, there are some green shoots appearing. You can see that on council tax, we've collected already this year 27.4%, which is not that, which is obviously more than last year, but probably not that much different to pre-pandemic levels. So we think that's quite encouraging. And of our business rates, we've collected 27.58%. Again, I think there's some green shoots appearing really in terms of that activity. Slide 11 gives you the collection arrears as of the 30th of June, and you can see that we've still got some way to go in terms of arrears for for previous financial years. Council tax is pretty much as we'd expect. It's around about 1.5 million, which is around just above pre-pandemic levels. But we can see the business rates arrears will have to be a focus of the council and the team in terms of £2.5 million worth of arrears in 21-22 that relate to previous financial years. So if we look at the potential future challenges, the future challenges, I think, in terms of collection rates, the first one is around the ending of the furlough scheme. And if we look at of April this financial year, 10,800 people still remained furloughed in Derby. And the end of the furlough scheme could present a cliff edge, increasing the number of working age who are out of work and affecting their ability to pay council tax. We have the end of the universal credit uplift, and the government have confirmed that the £20 weekly universal credit uplift will end in September. We still have lack of court time for our enforcement mechanisms. The court service have confirmed that we cannot have any court time until the end of September, and therefore, whilst we've made a good start this financial year in terms of our recovery programme, there's limited opportunities in terms of taking that next stage in terms of the collection. And we also have changes to our business rates relief schemes, and as I said, from July 2021, the relief goes from 100% to 66%, and there are cash caps that didn't exist for those relief schemes last year. We also have competing demands. So as we've opened up our recovery programme, we still have schemes in operation, that including things like the Restart scheme that supports our businesses. We have the Test and Trace support payment scheme that supports individuals. And even though those schemes are rightly prioritised by our teams, they are resource hungry in terms of their operation. So that will probably, the ongoing, if they do ongo or other schemes come into fruition, that will impact on our ability to be able to go to that heightened recovery. So that concludes my presentation on the business rates and council tax. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alison. Councillor Pender.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned 58.2% is the contribution of taxes. 58.2%, isn't it? %, yeah? The tax and business rates accounted for.
Yes, that's the amount of the total funding available to the council through this mechanism is 58%, yes.
So, because this is the first time I'm here, so I just want to know, how does it relate to other councils, and how does it relate to previous years? Thank you.
Okay, so it's pretty consistent over previous years. It's slightly increased recently because we have had a higher council tax increase, but that's not an outlier in terms of Derby. I think local government financing is moving more towards less support from central government and actually more support from the local economy in terms of council tax and business rates. So that's the model of local government funding going forward. So it is increasing slightly, but that's against local government generally. I think in terms of comparison to other local authorities, Derby City Council's council tax is quite a low tax base. Our council tax against our regional neighbours is quite a lot, no, I'm not saying quite, is lower than our comparisons. So we are quite a low base council tax collector.
So I think. And the second one was you said that with the lack of court time, so the areas are still there, yeah, so there are more defaulters and you had a lack of court time, so enforcement. What would happen if, so would there be like, there is a certain percentage which will never get collected?
We will still collect the debt, even though it's historic debt. So we will still go through the process of doing that. It will probably just take us longer to do that. We wouldn't, you know, we would still, it's in the interest of the council in terms of its financial sustainability to be able to collect that. So we will still do that. What the government has recognised that actually our ability to do that as fast as what we normally would do is slowed down. So what they've allowed us to do this year is spread that debt over a longer period of time, over a longer number of years, which is 4 years. So we operate something called a collection fund and a collection fund deficit, and we account for that usually the following financial year. But the government have acknowledged that our recovery will probably be slow to recover and have allowed us to spread that over 4 years. So we have got a bit of help in being able to do that. We haven't got the 1 year cliff edge that we would normally have, but we will still collect the debt.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Councillor Nawaz. Thank you so much for the presentation once again. You dealt with the technical problems, and thank you for jumping in for your colleague. First, I'd like to thank yourselves and your colleagues for helping during the pandemic with the business support grants. I'm sure all my councillor colleagues will agree with me that, you know, please pass that thanks on. You know, I know the amazing work that team did to support businesses that were going through probably the hardest times in living memory since the war. So thank you so much. And I think the presentation and the figures that we've seen tell a story of the difficulty that the businesses in our communities have faced. It's pretty stark reading. It's pretty stark reading about how the impact of COVID-19 has had on our local economy. It's all there for everyone to see. So you rightly pointed out earlier that the government have been putting money in to try and mitigate those issues with people being able to pay business rates. Basically, you know, people couldn't afford to pay them, they were getting support. But there is quite a big deficit between the pre-COVID income generation through this stream and during the COVID. So there must be a figure or percentage that the government have covered. What would that deficit realistically be above what the government have committed to? Is it negligible, or is it a big, you know, a big figure that we need to be aware of?
Firstly, thank you for your thanks for the team. I will pass that on because they have done an absolute sterling job. I agree with you in terms of ensuring that we get that money out really fast. So we did that. In terms of your question, I think it's probably a bit too soon to say what that might be, and that might be something we probably need to come back and look at because we're still in the relief schemes were still up until the 1st of July, so we're still probably early days. £40 million worth of business support that we got from the government is significant. Whether we can replace that ongoing is yet to be seen, and will be dependent on the recovery of the city and the makeup of the city. So I acknowledge that there's a risk. There's a risk there because it's a big income stream for the council. But like Rachel's just demonstrated in the previous presentation, you know, the council are aware that the city is changing and maybe business rates isn't necessarily the main footfall. And actually, you know, by bringing people to live into the city, the council tax opportunities might replace some of that. So we are aware of that, and they are very linked, I think, in terms of the changing and vibrancy of the city and the economic impact and the ability for the council to generate income from that. So I think it's probably a bit too soon to say the overall impact, but the 40 million is a significant amount to replace through the local economy.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Khan.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, and I support what Councillor Cooper and the hard work you put into all this during the COVID. And I know you've touched on we allow more time to businesses. I think that's a very good idea, so that gives us a chance. What Rachel brought a presentation to us in partnership working, so that gives time to businesses to build the city up. Yeah, and also, can we ask the government for more support for maybe for another 6 months or a year or something?
I think the government have been quite clear that the business rate support scheme has ended. It ended at the in terms of the tailing off. So I don't think that's probably something that we can do. Obviously, the government did do the restart grants that helped, but I think there's probably, everywhere you look, there's probably a call for government in terms of financial support during the COVID. So I wouldn't envisage that there would be additional schemes that would come out to support businesses through the business rates.
Thank you. Oh, I'll ask a question, Alison. Just a quick one. You know, you said about the recovery. After how long do you send in the bailiffs and the recovery? If they're not paying business rates or council tax?
I don't. We've got a policy that we've got that does that. So it's not immediate. There are lots of things that we do before we get to that stage. You know, we will try and negotiate payment plans. We will, which a lot of people do that. There's attachment of earnings orders. You know, where people can contribute for the salaries. So I can't give you the specific time, but that is the sharper end of the process. There are lots of other steps that we take before we would actually engage with bailiff activity. But I can share the timeline with you if you're interested with the minutes of the meeting. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You have to invest your efforts where you get the best return. You know, if you've got an individual or a company that's in liquidation, then you know, you invest a limited resource where you get the most payback, but you're absolutely right.
Once again, thank you very much for coming and presenting this. Thank you. We'll go to the last item, item 7, work programme 2021-22. Done.
So on the meeting on the 30th of September, we have health and safety update, digital and customer work programme, and the work programme that we're looking at now. On the 9th of December, we have working smarter and financial management system, procurement update, and the work programme. And then on the 10th of March, we've got a joint meeting with the Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Review Board on the Our City, Our River project. Obviously, they will be subject to the board agreeing them, and they might move around. Other items might be added. Thank you.
Go on, Councillor Khan.
You know, we said Rachel, so can we add that in the work program somewhere? And also, you know, the neighbourhood board, that's part of this also, isn't it? Can we get somebody from neighbourhood board? Have I read this somewhere here? To provide board.
When do we call Rachel? Is it December or do you want to call it September? It will be too
End of the year, I think, Councillor Cooper, we said, and towards the end of the year, didn't we? Rachel coming back.
Sorry, Councillor, that was Rachel's.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's dates on the presentation, the last bit, so maybe when she, you know, we could look at it 2 ways. First way is, do we bring her in before the end of that time scale, see if there's been any slippage, see how we're going, or do we wait for that final date, that timeline, and bring her in then? There's 2 ways to look at it, and I'm easy to work.
Yeah. So on the presentation, it says the review will be in March 2022.
So can we still recommend that future board that Rachel comes back and present the report either?
First municipal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Anybody else wants to add anything on in September one? Go on, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Councillor Nawaz. Topic reviews, it's probably a question for Dom. Have you spoke with the chair if there's any topic reviews down? Is there any specific ones?
There aren't any topic reviews at the moment for this board, no. That's up to the board.
So this board doesn't have any topic reviews?
At the moment, no. We can have one topic review a year, but there's not one at the
Yeah,
moment
so-
for this board.
I'd be interested, I don't know if this board has a role to play on joint body or neighborhood boards and forums? Have you? It says sporting information, have you got that there? Sporting information, where it says sporting information. I am on item 7, work program, recommendation, reason, sporting information. It says detailed under Article 6 of the Council Constitution, overruled scrutiny boards, review, decision, action, connection with make reports, recommendations to council, to cabinet for any joint or neighborhood board forum in connection with the discharge of any function. No, I don't think we can we?
What I suggest is leave it till the chair comes next, and you can talk to the chair, and we can go from there. Yeah? Is everybody agrees with that? Yeah. Right. Thank you very much.